Okay, so I think the first thing that I'll do then is I'm going to go over here to discussion posts so we can all see how to do that. And, you know, I might just do this on the computer over there while I have my laptop sitting in front of me. So I'll have like two computers up in front of me, one that y'all can see on the projector. So I'm actually going to switch our view over here just to the projector so that y'all see this, and Latadric can follow along on what he has in front of him there. Let's see, we'll switch over to, computer, that's what we want.
Your computer came before PowerPoint.
Yep.
Oh, you did that?
Yep. Indeed. I'm not sure if Latadric's going to need to see my face anymore, but just to help him out, I'm going to make him. Is that an electric blanket?
Yeah.
Okay, you win the intelligence award because I wish I had done that. Let's see. I'm really embarrassed. Not embarrassed, but I'm really ashamed now that I hadn't even considered the idea of bringing an electric blanket to school. One girl in class brought a cape. I was like, that's very innovative. So it's probably going to be very zoomed in, so I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to go down, down.
I'm going to plug it into this one instead. I didn't even see that one.
Okay. Which one? That one over there?
Yeah.
Okay, the black one? Okay. So, we can see, what can we see? Can we see anything? Oh, it's like it didn't select. Very strange. I wonder if it's just because nobody's done the computer yet this year. Let's see. What about this one? What about this one? Oh, that's what we always look at. That should be it. What does it say? Panasonic, Dell, Fujitsu, Apple, Acer, Sharp, Toshiba. Okay. Let's see. Has everybody got the projector plugged in like they should? Yeah. You know what? I've got a cord to fix this problem. Because that thing's not displaying the projector correctly. I'll just pull out the cord that I have for backup situations like this. Do I keep on me?
Just let us know that if I get up and walk out, it's not because I'm bored. My brother's homeschooled.
Yeah.
He's in a live lesson, and he can't figure the computer out. So,
Interesting. A lot of that going around. Okay, so. I always take it for granted that the technology will work as it usually does, and in this case it just doesn't. Is anything popping up now? There we go. Yeah, I don't know why the computer's connection's not working in the room. It's just not. So, here we go. Bring me that mic. Or wait, don't touch it. It's a very temperamental thing. Latydric, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because sometimes that cord will come out if I move it, so I just wanted to make sure. All right, so when you go to the discussion post page on Blackboard, this is what you'll see. Generally, you'll actually go on under My Institution page. You'll see all your courses on the right. You'll click on English 2323. Let me check and make sure I'm on the camera. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Then you'll look over to the left. You'll see discussion posts and quizzes. Now this weekend, there's only one quiz available. Oh, I guess I should do this from. Where's Magnus Baraka? Let's do this. Here's my fake student, Magnus Baraka. There's only one quiz available that you even will be able to see, the introductory quiz, and it's over like the syllabus and stuff. And it says anytime you'll have multiple attempts on a quiz, it'll tell you this test allows multiple attempts. I don't generally do that on the Britlit quizzes because I've noticed that when I have multiple attempts, people just don't read and nobody can talk to the talk about them in the class. So for the most part, these quizzes won't have multiple attempts. Occasionally they will. You'll just have to look and see if it does. But discussion posts is where we're going to start today. And the only ones you'll ever be able to see are the ones you can currently do. So if you see something and you're like, should I do it? I don't really know. You should. Because the only ones will be available are the ones that you're supposed to be doing at that time. They generally become available after class on Thursday and will remain available until Sunday night at midnight. I know you're thinking, but we don't have our class until Tuesday, so couldn't ours be Monday night? Well, not really, because I have to have time to grade them. And if it's Monday night, I'd literally have an 8 o'clock class next morning, and there'd be no way I could get them the grading in. And since this class is so discussion-based, I wouldn't have your opinions to try to develop thoughts around before we actually started talking about it. And I don't know, that doesn't sound good to me. In this one, it's really easy. You're just going to discussion post 0. You'll just introduce who you are, say like, hey, this is me, a little bit about yourself, and then reply to 2 other people saying, oh, hi, it's nice to meet you. Oh, hi, it's nice to meet you. That's easy, so I won't talk about that. But generally speaking, every week, you'll only see on the discussion post, if you'll notice where it says discussion post 1, you'll only ever see the writings that you're allowed to write about. Do double check the calendar to make sure I haven't accidentally included one of the ones that's in blue that you're not supposed to write about. But for the most part, you should only see the ones that you're supposed to write about. And remember, you only have to pick one. You can have all 3 of your posts cover 3 different pieces of writing. So you could have one do Charlotte Smith, you could have the other one do your reply on Tiger, and then reply to one that says about to a mouse. But you're only required to write about 1. So you could do all of them on the Tiger or all of them on to a mouse. I will warn you that if today we do end up having time to talk about Charlotte Smith's Written in the Churchyard of Middleton at Sussex, for a good 15 minutes or so, I will take that off of there. So don't plan on I'll write about that one. He talked about it. Because if I do end up having time to talk about it, I'll just take it off. So we can't do that. So what you'll do first is you'll click on it. So I'm going to click and then go in here so that what you normally would see is kind of a blank page with a blue button in the middle that says Create Thread. Besides people who've had me before, who has done discussion post forums in class before? Okay, so everybody's got a chance to do it. That's good. So mine work, I don't know if mine work exactly the same as the ones you've had in other classes or different, but for mine, generally it'll pop up a blank, you'd say Create Thread, and you'll see a blank box with nothing written in it, and you'll just have to type what it is you want to be there. In my case, I've already done that for you guys. I've already made the thread. And I wrote it on something I knew that y'all wouldn't be allowed to write about because I didn't want to take anything from you. So I picked a movie I thought lots of people have heard of at least. And Magnus Baraka wrote about The Dark Knight. And so I'd like you always to title your thread with your name and the poem you're writing about. That way I can see at a glance who's done what and if they've done something. So he starts out and says, and I'll let you know this is about 106 words. So it's just at the cap. Because you have to have 100 for your original posts and 50 for each of your replies. And he says, I was really interested in Christopher Nolan's take on Batman. I've read Batman comics all my life and have never seen a version so cool. However, it's almost like he was a side character to the Joker who, oh my gosh, was freaking amazing. Was that really the guy from Brokeback Mountain? That's insane. He was so creepy, and I like how he had multiple versions of why he had the scar because that makes him seem even creepier. And the ending having to deal with doing something unethical in order to prevent crime was such an interesting philosophical decision for a big-budget movie. So you see, you're not necessarily having to do these complicated literary breakdowns. I don't restrict you from that. If you're really interested in, literary elements and that's your thing, and you're wow, the symbolism here with the bats was amazing, and you want to talk about how and it adds such a layer of meaning, of darkness, and what does that say about his soul or something. If you really want to get into that, you're welcome to, but you don't have to go that deep. I do want you to try to hit big ideas though. So notice that he is talking about how the main character is almost like a side character in his own movie, which is strange. So that is sort of a literary element he's dealing with. additionally compares, talks about having to commit a crime to prevent crimes, and is that ethical, that idea? So that's kind of a big like world idea. Like for example, I've thought about this before. This is going to sound like really messed up that I've thought about this, but I've read it online. Have y'all heard recently in Alaska? Like I noticed, I follow this on Reddit. I look at this one Reddit called, there's a few different ones that I follow that are based around social media. One is Insane People Facebook, where it's people saying like legit nut stuff on Facebook, like I'm so happy the flu is here. I hope everybody dies. You know, they post that to Facebook, and you're like, what? There's Old People Facebook, where it's like generally people who are typing in search terms to Facebook, where it's like recipe for baked squash, and that they post that on like their Facebook status, and it's like, no, that's Grandpa, that's not how you find it. Another one I follow, the other two I follow are White People Twitter and Black People Twitter. Now, White People Twitter, it's generally some completely and totally inconsequential thing that sounds like only something like a rich person would concern themselves with, and they're generally making fun of that. Black People Twitter is the funniest thing I've ever read in my entire life. Like every single post is gold on Reddit's Black People Twitter subreddit. Just the observations about life are just amazing. But for whatever reason, in fact, my favorite thing I saw recently was actually not what I'm about to talk to you about, but there was one called, for whatever reason, this whole idea of hashtag Black Hogwarts took off. And so they were like posting images from other movies and things, like to kind of explain what life at like if Harry Potter universe was like, you know, entirely composed of like black people, black characters, what that would be like. It was a really funny hashtag, and like everybody was posting like stuff, and like somebody said like when Professor Umbridge arrives, and it was just Medea smacking somebody on a school bus. But it was like everybody taking like all the stuff from their culture, black culture, you know, like and putting it like and applying it to Hogwarts. I just thought it was hilarious. But the thing that's taken off like in the last day, which is very strange, but apparently I haven't seen the original post yet, so I don't know what this has been referenced to. But apparently there's been some new sort of sex doll invented that's incredibly detailed and lifelike. And don't you hate when like you start talking about something really awkward and you can't remember why you're going to talk about it in the first place? Because I want to talk about other stuff, and then I got distracted from what exactly I was doing here. Okay. Golly, I almost didn't get there. But they're getting incredibly more lifelike, and so people were saying like you can't even like the pictures. I saw one picture, but apparently it wasn't like the full album other people were talking about. It was so lifelike. I thought it was a picture of a person at first, and then they said like, oh, these are customizable, and I was like, what do you mean these women? And I went, oh, that's not a person, that's a doll. I was like, that is kind of insane. And like you could change eye color and like size and like, you know, skin tone. Like it was all up to you, like how this doll like looked. And speaking of like committing a crime to prevent a crime, I've thought about this before, and I saw it once in like I don't know if it was a psychology journal or some kind of just web post, but we're going to talk about these kinds of ideas in class, okay? Just let you know, like some of these like really deep, like is this right, is this wrong kind of things, well, like I'll try to address. But I thought one time, like, you know, people who are, everybody knows I hate talking about it. People who are pedophiles. You know what a pedophile is, right? Like they find children sexually attractive, and that's really messed up. It's wrong. I doubt that they want to. I doubt it's like you wake up one morning and you say, you know what, I really just want to have that be what I'm attracted to. So I guess it's kind of like, you ever heard of like people who are really hardcore, like traditional Christians, and won't allow themselves to practice their homosexuality? Like if they're homosexual and they like men and like they're a man, like they just won't practice, right? But a lot of times, like people, they can't help themselves, and they don't have that willpower, and so they do the thing that is their instinct, and so that's how, you know, children get molested and stuff and get abused. But what if at some point they started making those dolls so realistic, or even like androids, where somebody could own something like that, satisfy their urges, and never actually attack a real person? So it'd be almost like you're giving an avenue to sort of create a crime to prevent the actual crimes. Isn't that weird? I tend to side on, in that particular case, I side on the side of, I don't think that's okay, but it's still an intriguing question. Like, if you can prevent crimes, it's almost like the old, like, Christian idea of trying to teach abstinence-only education. When you don't teach kids what sex is, you just say, they're like, what is sex? And you're like, it doesn't matter, but don't have it. You're like, what? Like, I heard somebody talking about what a condom is, and you're like, no. Like, don't do that. But it's ironic that the states that teach abstinence-only education are also the states that have the most welfare usage for teenage mothers. Did you know that? So, like, generally it's conservative Christian states teach abstinence only and have more teenagers that get pregnant. Which is like, you think, oh, why we don't tell them what sex is? How'd they figure it out? Even before the internet, people would go, just what's this for? And eventually they'd figure it out. I think that's just how that works. You just have it built in. So a lot of times sometimes to do something, talk to kids about sex, which is something you really don't want to do, can actually cause them to not have it, which you'd think it would be the opposite, right? You think, well, if I tell them what it is, they're just going to go out and do it. If I give them a condom, they'll just go have it. But that's not necessarily true. A lot of times you can scare them enough by talking about it and saying like all the things that are bad that they end up not actually doing it, which is strange. So that's an intriguing idea that came out of this post, just to commit a crime to prevent a crime, to do something bad to prevent more bad things from happening, I think is a neat, intriguing idea to include in discussion post. And then your replies, and they can sound conversational. You see how it sounds conversational, like, oh my gosh, so amazing. That sounds like something you'd say to your friend. It doesn't have to sound like you're writing an essay. That's what the essays are for. It can sound more conversational, like you're actually discussing, with somebody. But still sound legible. We want to understand what you're saying. It shouldn't be like a text or like if you're in a scenario where you don't have autocorrect on and it's just typing like gibberish. You ever had that happen? Like you go to Google to search things and Google doesn't autocorrect you until you hit the search. And so sometimes you write like, and you're like, no, I wanted to I was looking for a restaurant. But it's like you're so used to the phone fixing it for you that when Google's search bar doesn't, it's like shocking. Have you ever seen the video called like I can has or I what is prangent? You'll seen that? It's like girls are trying to figure out how to get pregnant or what makes them pregnant or if they're pregnant, and they're typing it into a search forum that doesn't autocorrect because it's as you to type in your own box, and so it doesn't autocorrect it. It's almost like Google search bar. So they continually are misspelling pregnant because they're so used to it spelling it for them. And it's like, how can tell if 6 months prangent? Like they can't type the word correctly. So you really want to try to at least spell things correctly here. But their first reply the guy has is he replies to the content of what he was talking about with Batman. He says, I don't know, man. I thought it was kind of stupid. Like, why didn't he fall into the acid, Joker, and become a Joker that way? That's how it happened, man. I think it's kind of dumb the way we don't know anything about him. And he just looked like he probably smelled bad and didn't shower. The Joker, I mean, he wasn't actually in a nice suit like the real Joker. Okay, so this guy's kind of used to, I guess, more of the polished, maniacal, wearing a three-piece suit Joker. He's very fancy schmancy. Has, well-coiffed hair, makeup that he puts on. So he was not happy with this representation of creepy, bad-smelling Joker. So he wrote that. He was just very honest about it. And now I don't want you to really be as rude as this next guy is.
Yeah, not that.
But I do want you to, respond in kind of a conversational way and address it. So he says, I think you should maybe stick with the Tim Burton movies, the dumb one with Robin. Doesn't sound like this is really your type of movie. Maybe you could watch something like Bring It On or 50 Shades of Grey or maybe even Twilight if you're looking for your kind of believability. there's no need to be that rude. And that's why I included that example to talk to you about how far not to go. He is doing okay on, I'd say, like, the grammar and the spelling and the conventions that I'm okay with to sound conversational. But you don't need to be, like, attacking people. You can disagree. Just don't sound like you're sort of attacking somebody for what they think. Now, I know it's kind of rude for me to say that saying, hey, go watch Twilight is like an attack, because I'm sure people do like Twilight. But just that's my example here. And so I believe in this case, I think this one was like 72 words and this one was like 64 or something. So they're floating right around that 50. And then this original post up here was 106. So you can kind of see what you're supposed to do. And when you have a box pop up, it pops up like, for replies, pops up like this. And it's automatically going to put the title in there. You'll have to remember to title yours, though, when you do your original post. Let's leave this page. And I'm going to go over and go now to where we haven't been yet, assignments. And the only assignment you should be able to see right now is the only one that you can look at. And I think when after class today, I'm going to try to go upstairs and upload this in PDF format as well. That way everybody's not having to have access to Word just to look at it. But to go here and actually do the assignment, you would click this and then browse your computer for the attached file, check the box, and then hit submit. But we're not going to quite get that far yet. What you want to do is click the attached files instead. Yes?
If you use Google Docs, you can open up Word documents and you can save stuff as Word documents.
Oh, really? Neat. Okay. I see. I don't use Google Docs. I wasn't aware of being able to do that. I know that does work on a Chromebook. I didn't know that was also available to be done on a regular PC. Oh, on a phone, really? Cool. Is that an iPhone or? Yeah. Okay, so you can do it on an iPhone. So, and I have the wrong class number on here, but it's the same paper principle, so I'll change the class number as well. But you'll click the assignment, and I guess it asks you to download it, so I'll have to do that. Download. Then you'll open it. With a PDF, it'll just pop right up. It'll have to open it like this. You know what I could just do? I'll just go ahead and it's not going to take like 2 seconds. I'm already in the class here, so I'll just take my assignment sheet that I was going to do. Change the class number for it because it's just right here. Not 3, dummy. I want to just change the last number to 3. What the heck? There, I don't know what's going on. It just wouldn't let me. And I'll just make a PDF of it. That way we can look at it in PDF format. It should open it automatically. Isn't that what it does? I don't know. I'm sure it's going to open it in a second, and I'll be like, oh, you're supposed to one page, and I'll make it bigger so we can see it. And it'll show up on the video and on the projector. So there are 2 of these essays that are going to be due. The first one's going to be due on week 3, day 2, and the second one's going to be on week 5, day 1. Did I tell y'all that as Brit-Lit students, y'all get your papers graded first? Okay. So those days are really kind of important to make sure you get those in on time. I know in some of the last classes, like if you've had me before, I was a little flexible on the dates, and I technically still am. So if you turned it in, late, it would just be a way later you would see your grade come in. But if you get it in on time, you'll see your grade come in probably at the very beginning of that weekend, like say on Friday or Saturday. Because this week, last semester I had a pretty rough semester because the first semester we've had our baby. Angela, were you in my class that semester? In the fall? Did you have me in the fall?
I think so.
Yeah. So the grading was taking a while, but I've already given my wife, oh shoot, I haven't, I have to today, a calendar that has all the weekends she can't schedule stuff on it. And I'll actually start grading on Fridays on those weekends instead of Sundays as I traditionally do, so that you'll see grades come in, I think, fairly quickly for you guys. So it'd be good to get those in on the Tuesdays and the Thursdays that I asked for. And the critical evaluation, actually, I don't know if y'all remember, but y'all always had in 1302, it was census analysis, then critical evaluation, then another census analysis, and another census analysis. This time it's 2 census analysis and then the critical evaluation. So it's flipped a little bit, but you have one less census analysis to do. There's only 2 here. So what you're going to do first is pick one of the assigned literary readings for the semester. That's anything that I've done in green, okay? So you can't do any of the ones that aren't in green. So you'd have to go to Blackboard. You either look at the syllabus itself, or you can just go straight down. So you could look here at the file, go down to the calendar portion, zoom in and take a look at what you can do. Or the other option is to just scroll down and look at the calendar on the main page of our Blackboard. Look for a green reading. So you can't do your paper on Chimney Sweeper or the other Chimney Sweeper or London, but you could do it over Written in the Churchyard, Milton at Sussex, unless I remove that today. No, you can still do it. Blake's The Tiger, Burns is To a Mouse, To a Louse, and Thomas Shanter. Is anybody in this particular room, if Latydric, if you are, I wouldn't be able to see your hand raised, but is anybody in here actually 21?
I'm
Over 21? Huh?
Next month.
Next month 21? That's not gonna be good enough. Corey, you are 21. I was asking because I'm not encouraging anybody to do this, but I was about to mention this thing. Robert Burns is who we're reading, but I think that like either next week or this week, it might even be today. Let me see when's there's actually a holiday that it's today. No. 25th. Is that next Thursday? So next Thursday is actually a holiday that every year celebrates Robert Burns' birthday. It's a national, I think, Scottish holiday. So what people generally do is they eat haggis, and which we're not going to. I'm not even doing that. But people like have a glass of scotch in his honor that day because of his contribution to Scottish letters. It's interesting. There's a holiday that actually celebrates him that happens literally the day we talk about him, which is the first time that's ever happened. So I thought I'd mention that. And if you're not 21, do not drink. That includes you, Elijah.
I don't drink.
Well, that's a good idea. There is imitation scotch. I just made it up. I don't know if that's true. But maybe you could get a piece of scotch tape. And no, it's not the same. Tape something to something, and this is exhilarating. I just taped a piece of paper to a thing. So you can pick any of the green readings to write your essay about, and once you've picked a green reading, preferably something that you really enjoyed or felt comfortable with, maybe your favorite reading that you've done so far, what you'll then do is write a synthesis, analysis, reader response to that particular literary reading. If you've done other types of literature papers before for other teachers, they generally would call this reader response. I've called it synthesis analysis because it's a long, complicated story, but I have to call it synthesis analysis. It's essentially a reader response, and what you do is take information from the story and synthesize it with the knowledge and experiences of your own life, as well as analyze reasons why your opinion on the work of literature have been shaped by your life experiences. So I want you to think of these questions. Like, you don't have to answer each one of them one by one, but there are questions to consider when writing the paper. What did the literary reading mean to you? How did it make you feel? How did your experiences shape the way that you read the story? And basically, you just need to write what from the story you most responded to and what in your life made you respond that way. So try to provide compelling thoughts about the themes and subject matter as well that show true insight. So it's not just telling me what you think about the story. I'm wanting you to look at your life experiences or upbringing or whatever and tell me why you think what you think about the poem. Because I really want us to, that's the most important thing about this assignment to me, is for us to identify why we think what we think. Because I think one of the bigger problems that we have in the world today is people will have an opinion and not have any idea why they have it. Many of us are essentially just, like, a lot of times too, especially if you don't care about politics early on in life, but your parents do, you end up thinking exactly what your parents think. Whether if they're liberal, you turn out liberal. If they're conservative, you turn out conservative. And you never actually consider, why is it I think this? Like, if you're very pro-gun, why am I pro-gun? Do I actually like guns? Do I want to have a gun? if you're very pro women having abortions and being able to do that, you're like, why do I think that? Do I think that because my parents did? Do I think that because I did? I've noticed there's a lot of people, I'm sure you've noticed this as well, like say there'll be a liberal who was in a situation where they could have defended themselves, but they didn't have a gun. And then after that experience, well, I'm pro-gun now. Or people who are like against, gay marriage until their son comes out as gay and they love their son. So they're like, yeah, I think I'm pro-gay marriage now. Beliefs change as soon as you have a personal experience with something. And that happens very often. So I want you to recognize and try to recognize why it is you think the things that you think, so you can determine whether you actually think it, or it's just something that you've more or less inherited from teachers or parents, a church, friends, or whether you've actually, considered, like, is this really what I think, or is this something that, I've, just gathered from the world and never put any thought into myself. And as a result of that, too, in many cases, you may feel what you feel, not just because, I was bullied in school, or, I always valued, my family valued intelligence, but there very well might be like you believe something because of religious reasons. Like you're like, I really didn't like the content of this poem because I didn't feel like, what I learned about what Jesus would do, it would do it this way. Jesus would not have approved of this, so I don't approve of this. Well, that's your personal belief. And on this particular style of paper, you're asked to explain why you think what you think. And so in that case, you're not trying to convince somebody else to think it. You're just explaining why you think it. And that gets fine to express that that's for religious beliefs. Now, in a paper like in our other classes, like 1301, where I said, you've got to convince somebody to think this thing and make it a universal audience. So you're trying to convince as many people as possible. Well, you wouldn't want to make the religious argument for gay marriage, because if that person's not religious, they're like, okay, so I don't believe in your religion. What else do you have? What other reason do you have gays shouldn't marry? And you're like, that was kind of all I had. So you'd have to develop other logical reasons, like, are the kids going to have a tougher upbringing? Is there some sort of developmental or educational issues when you do have gay parents? By the way, it's been fairly well proven that there's not. A long time ago, there used to be when it wasn't as accepted, but really it was a problem of acceptance. Because it's hard to be a part of a family and turn out well adjusted when everybody's telling you that your parents are an abomination. That would just have a psychological effect. And that was the issue that they were having, not necessarily that there was any problems of development. So make sure that if whatever reason you think a thing, you express that, okay? Although don't tell me anything scarier that I have to report. You're like, well, I think this because I actually want to become a serial killer, and that's my plan. I'm like, whoa. I have to tell somebody. And by the way, playing video games, that doesn't make you a serial killer, right? So if you always say I'm a video gamer, not a digital serial killer. Like that's not, people tend to get uncomfortable with certain phrasings. What now?
I'm a digital serial killer.
Digital serial killer. It has a really cool ring to it, though, to be honest. Like it has a neat sound. Have y'all watched the show Mindhunter on Netflix? It's really good. It's really good. It was interesting watching them. Like they were calling them sequence killers, and then like at some point they said, I don't know, sequence implies that like it's just they do it in a row, but it's not really habit. And you watch them going sequence in order, series killer. Serial killer? They're like, that's got a good ring to it. And I was like, that's what they ended up using. But it was kind of interesting to, have a show. It's a really cool show if you'll have a chance. And it's definitely going to have a second season. Another good show, Handmaid's Tale. Anyone watch that?
I did watch Stranger Things on the told us too.
Which was a good idea, right?
Yes.
Handmaid's Tale is a show that it's so good you have to keep watching it. But it makes you angry every episode you watch, because essentially what somebody interpreted the Bible, like over-interpreted it and like really focused on certain parts and basically took away all women's rights in the service of trying to have children, because the world, you can't really have children anymore. Like people just aren't, like they can't get pregnant, and so the hospitals are basically empty. And so because they think that the whole world's going to get wiped out, they allow essentially a religious extremist group to take over America. and they essentially take over, like they get rid of women's rights and all sorts of crazy things. It's so like I'm just angry the whole time I'm watching that show because I have 2 daughters and a wife, and I'm like, she's got like a master's degree, and they're like, well, women can't read anymore. I was like, what? Yes.
Have you watched Black Mirror?
I have watched Black Mirror, but not the new season.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Black Mirror is incredible.
Yes.
In fact, the episode. Oh, it's such a beautiful episode. San Junipero. Good Lord. Like, it's beautiful. It's just the whole thing is. I was crying. Let's see. So, the format of these papers is just standard MLA. And I also have a sample paper so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Like, a heading at the top, title of the story or poem that you're talking about. And then it's 600 words. I don't want you to use outside research materials for these assignments, just the story. I just want to know your own thoughts on it. I really don't want you even going to like Spark Notes, especially Spark Notes. I don't want you going and finding academic journal articles to give you a better sense of what it's about. I just want your natural response to this stuff in this case. Now, I don't want a works cited page unless you didn't use the textbook. If you're using some edition of that Norton textbook, that's fine, no works cited page. But if you're looking at them all online, go ahead and include a works cited page with a link, because sometimes there are discrepancies between the textbook and the online versions. And I noticed one time some student was talking about all this stuff that was in it, and I was like, that's not there. And it's because they were looking at like an unabridged version that the author eventually put out, but they weren't looking at the actual one that we had and we're talking about, which is considered the official. So it's good to let me know what edition you're reading by showing the online link. Now, you're graded on your ability to present ample detail from the story you've chosen, basically so I can tell you have read it, you're familiar with it. And it's poem in this case. In fact, I should say, and I'll just make this change and add it to the story poem. Because in some case, in fact, I might reverse the order so it's clear that poem is more likely something you'll see. And explain how you responded to the story, basically what you think about it. And then analyze, looking at how the story is written as well as your own experiences, why you responded in that way. So we've got the B is the what you think, C is why you think what you think. And my hints here, and usually it says hints, but it's really not so much a hint as it is, this is what people always do wrong, and this is me telling you so that you won't screw it up. Don't spend time summarizing the plot or giving a line-by-line analysis of what's happening. Be sure to include your personal opinions about the meaning of the work, and be sure to relate those opinions and meanings to specific events and details in your own life. People will often not explain why they think what they think. They'll just say, here's what I think. Or they won't tell me what they think at all. They'll just, I guess, go into this weird sort of fever dream, and they start writing about the plot, and like, here's what happens, here's what happens. This poem is about this, poem is about this, poem is about this, ooh, hoo, hoo, hoo. And they go, 600 words, done. And I'm like, I already knew what it was about. I'm teaching it. Like, in this case, do be aware that if you're writing a paper about a piece of literature, think about any audience that would end up reading an essay about a piece of literature probably is familiar with that piece of literature. Unless you're doing like a review and, hey, you should read this, which you're not doing. So you have to consider that the person on the other end of this paper is familiar with it, so there's no reason for you to spend a long time summarizing it. Because if I just read a giant summary, I'm like, yes, I know. Yes, thank you. I'm aware of this. And I get very bored. Now, there is another idea I wanted to kind of add to this, I think. That's the narrative essay. I don't want that. In fact, I want to open the one that I showed to. The 1302 class, because I think I added an idea today that I'd like to incorporate in your guys's as well. In your guys's. This is Texas. Y'all's. I don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah, let's add this. And I'll put this in the official version. So I say relate to important, not superficial details, like when you're relating to the stuff. For example, don't relate like if you're reading you might remember the story The Birthmark from 1302, where like the lady has the birthmark and the scientist is her husband and he hates it, he tries to get rid of it. So she can be perfect, ends up killing her. Try not to say something like, well, the character in the story has a birthmark, and I have a birthmark, so that's how I relate to it. That's very surface level. Literally, the birthmarks are on the surface. It's a superficial relationship. Think instead, well, I was in a relationship with someone who insulted my appearance too, because you're like relating to the relationship between the two characters in the story and the way your relationship functions similarly, and that's a much deeper connection. And that's what I'm looking for, is those kind of deep connections, not superficial, like, he said in the story that he had shoes. I also own a pair of shoes. It's very lame. Not just incidental relationships. And I do have a sample paper at the end of the packet and a big blank space for some reason. I think it's because I added those lines. There we go. I'm going to add something to this. Email your questions or comments about Blackboard and Canvas. Actually, I say Debbie Hellowell, but I think she died. In fact, I'm going to change Campus Connect to my PJC, because that's what we're doing now instead of Campus Connect. Help desk at parisjc.edu. If y'all have issues getting on Blackboard, like it won't work, or you can't use the research databases that we have, like it's not letting you in, help desk at parisjc.edu is who you should email to assist you in those matters, because they can generally get it figured out fairly quickly. And I would suggest as soon as possible y'all getting on Blackboard to make sure you can get on it, because it's very possible that you'll be locked out of it for some reason. I've had it happen to 2 students so far who've had to email help desk. Now, I'm going to read the sample essay and talk about what it does well. My apologies if you heard this before. It's a good refresher. But got the title, Census Analysis Birthmark. And he is going to do, like, it's fine in the introduction to kind of introduce the story real quick and do a mini summary, but you don't have to do like a long drawn-out plot summary. So he says, in Nathaniel Hawthorne's story, The Birthmark, a man marries a woman with a small red birthmark on her face. Georgiana had always liked it, until her husband Elmer grew to hate it. Since he was a scientist, he became obsessed with thinking of ways he could remove the blemish so that she could finally be perfect. But I think he misses the point of perfection. And in this paper, you don't actually have to have what most introductions to papers have, which is a thesis. He felt like kind of unifying it all together by saying this is the point of perfection. That sort of does end up being the general principle that he follows to the paper. But you don't really have to do that. You can just have different observations that pop up one after the other and almost have it function like a mosaic. Like, well, here's how I felt about this part. Over here, though, I kind of felt like this. In this other area, I felt like this. And then have it each time you do that, saying here's why, and here's why, here's why. But you don't have to have those all match up perfectly every time. Ah, better. Oh, that reason changed it. That's strange. I just saw that blue mark and I was like, why is that there? So after he does that little summary, like, he doesn't have to have a thesis if he doesn't want to. He decided to have a little unifying kind of theme for it, but you don't have to. And next he says, Elmer said that truth often finds its way to the mind, close muffled in robes of sleep, to prove his point that he had a right to hate the birthmark. But it wasn't a dream that made Elmer hate the birthmark. It was his own wicked heart. Instead of showing the truth, I think dreams are fiction, because people would react in a different way in real-life situations. Of all the dreams I have had, I cannot think of one that made me figure out the truth about something. Some dreams are too good to be realistic. Some are unbelievable. Some are vivid and scary at times. But I never found any truth I could use in my everyday life. Now, in this case, I actually wish that he did vaguely reference his personal experiences by saying, I never had a dream that did these things. But he didn't really give an example of the kind of dreams he does have, which I would have preferred. So I'm hoping that he does give me at least one or two specific reasons why he thinks what he thinks at some point. So I'm still holding out hope that it's going to work. The next paragraph, he kind of switches gears and said, Elmer's helper Aminadab displayed wisdom when he said, if she were my wife, I would never part with that birthmark. I don't know why I gave him that voice. I've always thought he sounded like that. He wasn't a scientist like Elmer. He thought the birthmark was minor and wouldn't want to remove it because he liked her the way she was and how unique it made her. The birthmark was minor, and you have to look past it for who she is as a person, and not just something on her face. Aminadab, unlike Elmer, understood that. Again, he's not telling me why he thinks this. He's just saying, "Oh, this is what you should think." Look past it. Why? I wish I knew. He wouldn't tell me. So I'm hoping eventually he'll give me something I like. I do like the opinions, though. His opinions he's expressing fine. It's just not the why. Toward the end of the story, Georgiana states that life is but a sad possession to those who have attained precisely the degree of moral advancement at which I stand. Being in what I find myself, methinks I am of all mortals the most fit to die. It's ridiculous that she is willing to die over someone else's perception of her birthmark. In the beginning of the story, she found it to be so essential to her character, but at the insistence of someone who finds fault in it, she's suddenly willing to risk death to remove it. There's no way that something so minor should bring such distress. Life is way too short to stress over something so small, as I'm well aware. In high school, I worried about what people thought about my body type or whether I was overweight. In the end, nobody really cared, but it brought me a ton of undue stress. Okay, so that's a more complicated relationship. That's saying, I feel this way because I felt the same as the character felt, but just about something different. Not being self-conscious about a birthmark, but being self-conscious about my weight and body type. So that's a more deeper connection that I'm looking for. So he finally gave it to me. Whew! I was worried he wasn't going to give me anything. And then the rest of the time, he's basically doing it the whole time, but just in a different way. While I generally personally prefer personal experiences, you can also do literary references, and not even necessarily books, but you can do films that it's reminded you of. But I'm going to kind of expect that those relationships be complicated. Most people who've tried to do it have ended up saying birthmark reminds me of that movie The Town where he's got a tattoo and the guy's trying to hide it, and I'm like, what? You're just connecting the birthmark being kind of somewhat like a tattoo, and that's what I'm looking for. It's more like this. Over the course of the story, I also found myself becoming increasingly irritated over the importance placed on science above humanity. He's more concerned with getting rid of the birthmark that he can't think of anything else, just to see if he can get away with it. It reminds me of Jurassic Park when the mathematician says something like, everyone was so excited thinking about whether or not they could that nobody took the time to stop and think about whether or not they should. Hawthorne really encapsulates this idea throughout the story, since Elmer has no justification for risking a human life just to see if he can achieve something. And it does really match up with what's happening in the story. He's so worried about whether or not could I do this that he doesn't stop and think, well, actually, should I do this? She may die if my experiment goes wrong. And he never actually thinks about whether he should. He only thinks about can I. And that's what ends up essentially killing her. So I did like this relationship that he drew because it's kind of complicated. And not just something superficial. And just say, she felt like she looked gross, like the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park looked gross, He says, this also reminds me of Gattaca. That's a more obscure movie. Another movie I watched all the time when I was younger. In that movie, everyone has the ability to choose what genetic features they want their children to have, and it calls into question whether or not humanity should have the right to choose what features, like eye color or birthmarks or even mental retardation, should be given to their unborn children. The movie basically decided that no matter what genes people are born with, whether or not they are supposedly inferior genes, they are equal as people in reality. Elmer might miss that point, but Hawthorne definitely intends for us to see. So that's a neat idea, too. Y'all heard of that movie, Gattaca, before? Some people have, some people haven't. But it's called Gattaca, and I think it was just a clever title because I think it was a reference to, Attica? Isn't that a famous prison somewhere? I remember a movie, somebody going, Attica, Attica. I don't know. It might just be Attica, New York. But I think they named this place, or named it Gattaca, was what I heard, was because all the letters are letters for those proteins that are part of DNA. Adenine, thymine, guanine. I don't remember them all. Okay, yes, I don't know, something like that. T's not one, is it? Is T one? I feel like one of those letters is not right. Oh, it's just missing the U, right? No, is there a U?
There's a U in RNA.
In RNA? Oh, that's what I'm getting. So it's not in DNA. It's been a while since I've had biology courses. I wish they would every 10 years, or at least every 15, make all people in society go back and retake the most basic core classes, because things will have changed. But instead, as soon as we become adults and we get past college, We just have that one little bit of knowledge that we carry all the rest of it in our lives, and that's what causes all the old people to be like, back in my day. Well, back in your day, things were different. So it's like they hadn't learned as much stuff. And then as I get older, I'm starting to forget things like, what exactly is DNA composed of? And that kind of scares me. I wish I was forced to go back to school to take those basic classes again so I remember. Keep well-rounded. Anyways, in Gattaca, people can choose exactly what genetic features their kids have, and so basically everybody's born superior, and if you don't have the money to afford that, it's like you're considered inferior. And like they essentially predict when you're born, they're like, oh, he's going to die at the age of 34. And it's like, they tell you that, because it's like, oh, he's got a heart condition he's born naturally with, and so he can't overcome that, he will die. And they're like, oh, okay. And so, but people who can afford it, they're like, yeah, I want to give my kid the best genetics. It actually calls into question, too, like recent things that have happened. Like there was a blind couple, and they wanted to, a lot of people have been doing this kind of thing where they're trying to make sure that their kids aren't born with like sickle cell anemia and like they're modifying the genes that way, like trying to get rid of diseases. This couple was interesting. The blind couple, they wanted to genetically control, they wanted to have their child be born blind like them because they felt like both of them were blind and they would be better equipped to handle parenting for the blind. They thought that being blind was sort of a reward, a very rewarding experience, and they wanted their child to experience that and get the chance to experience that. They thought it had made them like better people and stuff like that. And people got like an outrage. They were like, this is ridiculous. Like you should give the kid a chance to decide. A kid can't decide whether they want to be blind. You're forcing that on them. But when you really ask, you're like, okay, so you're saying the kid should have a chance to decide whether to be blind. Yeah, right? That's what a lot of people say. So you consider being blind to be an inferior state of being. And you're like, well, I mean, you'd much rather see, right? But it's like, so you're considering the life of a blind person less than that of a person who can see. And you're like, well, not really. You're like trying to just say, how do I get around me thinking that being blind is worse than being not blind? Like you're trying to like not say it like, but you really do. It's in a sense you think that their life.
I think it overheated.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Overheated?
It had a little
popping up.
heat warning or whatever.
Yeah, I'll just read you the last sentence. It had a warning that popped up and said heat trigger. How in the future y'all are free to tell me when that happens.
I didn't think it would actually turn on.
You're like, I was just thought it.
Another class and they said, oh, it would go off.
You're like, oh, I thought it was like a Hawaiian missile warning or something. Did y'all hear about that? Like Hawaii's like missile threat, from Korea. You're like, what? Our bad. False alarm. We meant weather's fine. Anyways, so. Even these ideas, they still pop up today, and like in the birthmark is even still relevant. And the last sentence I'll just read y'all. It says, I guess I've always felt, even as a little kid, what Hawthorne felt 2 centuries ago when he was writing this, that science, as much as men might think it can, will never replace God. I don't even know if that necessarily followed with what he was talking about, but I just like the line, so I was like, good job. And I gave the kid a 98 for that. So it had a word count of 684 words, which is a little above the 600, but I thought it was really good, so I included it. Is that really 684 words? That doesn't look that long. So that's how we do. What do we do on the census analysis? So the discussion posts. It actually couldn't have happened at a better time because I think we're just about done. I think.
We still have like 8 minutes at least.
What do you want to talk about?
Well, you're not gonna let us go, are you?
I might actually. This is one class that every single semester I tend to actually let the Brit class out about 10 minutes early. It doesn't happen again. Don't get used to it. You already know. Like you're like, is there something wrong, Nichols? Are you on something? Are you sick? But yeah, it's just in most classes we don't have this much time to actually go over the census analysis and discussion, and we don't really have time to cover that poem. I would like people to be able to write because most of English literature, Britlit, is dominated by straight white males who were rich or came from a family that had money. I mean, there's no orphans, not even really hardly any poor people. It's always somebody whose parents could at least have afforded to send them to school, which not everybody could at the time. So I don't really want to take away y'all's ability to write about Charlotte Smith, who I believe is like the only female we're writing about. I could have us write about Mary Shelley, like and do Frankenstein. But from my experience, Frankenstein's a really damn hard book for people to read. And you would have to buy a separate novel, which I try to prevent. That's why we're reading Conrad's Heart of Darkness from the book instead of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's a really, really hard book. Like, I've gone back as an adult these days and read it and been like, man, Mary Shelley is freaking too smart. Like, too smart for me. It is interesting that spawned a whole wave. Like, everything we read, like, you know, we watch like zombie movies and like monster movies. That probably wouldn't happen if it wasn't for Mary Shelley. She really popularized that whole idea of the supernatural, which had been done before, but like she really tapped into something that people wanted.
The guy who wrote War of the Worlds or whatever, you know, it's like
Yeah.
1820, he's writing about robots to save
Yeah.
killing everybody with death
It
rays
was
and
good
stuff.
if you could understand.
It's just I always found it so it's so weird. The modern take on Frankenstein is so different than the book. Modern take on Frankenstein's like, I was dead, but now I'm alive. You know, my brain's all messed up. Frankenstein, you know, from Mary Shelley, who was like some sort of genius. Like, it's just he like spoke in like the most verbose, high vocabulary, erudite way. Like, it was just absurd. Like how smart he sounded every time he spoke. But yeah, I feel bad we can't really cover. Not that we can't cover Mary Shelley. I just feel like having y'all buy yet another extra book when there is a novel in here that's at least decent. And I would want to talk about Conrad's Heart of Darkness anyway because of all the cans of worms that it opens and how funny it is to me. People don't usually consider that book funny, but there's parts of it I just consider openly hilarious. Any questions before we go? The clock's accurate. Nope. If y'all have info sheets that I could take up, please hand those to me. If you forgot to hand me your syllabus contract last time, again, I'll take those as well. Really glad I did.
What did knock over
A
that?
couple over here.
I literally knocked you over with a piece of paper.
Y'all enjoy.